So I've talked a little bit about what I think is wrong with the world right now and how we got here, sort of diagnosing the problem. But I want to emphasize how important it is to keep your mind clear and not be clouded with the great isms. And by that I mean capitalism, socialism. See, I firmly believe that these two terms have been used to the point where they're meaningless, that they don't really carry the same meaning that most people think. I'll start with, well, they're all ideas of what you think of as money. And I wanted to show this one because this may not look like money at all to you. This is a 100 Reichsmark from 1908, back in the Imperial German period. And that's where we need to start when we talk about the great isms. They were defined back when this looked like money to people. And the idea of money basically flowed from the Kaiser, the king, the whatever. And it was a very different world. Now, things have evolved with time. We have different definitions, but, well, as they evolve, they start to become many different things at once. They start to lose their meaning simply because they mean too many things. I'll start with capitalism. See, capitalism is often traced to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, published, interestingly, in 1776. And this was where he said the basic argument was that the wealth of a nation is the sum total of the wealth of the people. You let the people go forward and prosper, and the nation will prosper. This was a radical idea in a world that was full of kings and kaisers. But it was the basis of what we would call free trade. The invisible hand of the market would guide things. Now, invisible hand has been given all kinds of divine properties over the years, but it just simply means that things happen of their own accord. And many people use Adam Smith's writing to describe a world that is very open, free market capitalism, but it's important to understand that what he was responding to was mercantilism, the idea that the state controls everything directly, and it's the wealth of a nation, as is the title of his book, that is paramount to everything. His thesis was you let the people prosper, the wealth of the nation will follow, rather than direct control. So we have basically two kinds of capitalism, free market capitalism and mercantilism. Now, most people, when they say capitalism, they mean free market capitalism, unless you let them talk for a while. And then you might say, well, we're losing jobs. Oh, yes, we need to have tariff protections from China. Or, oh, yes, we need to make sure we have critical resources. See, that's mercantilism talking. That's not the free market. The free market says nations don't really matter that much. I mean, in Adam Smith's case, they did, but it was the job of the nation to make sure that things were taken care of and then back off. It's closer to that Friedmanite view in many respects. Now, this can be taken to an extreme, and if you read Adam Smith carefully, you will probably get a different view than most people who talk about him. And this brings me logically to talking about the other view, Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx was born, well, not in Germany. I want to emphasize how long ago this was. He was born in the Confederation of the Rhine, just 12 years after the Holy Roman Empire stopped existing. And he died, well, 25 years before this bill was created in London, but he was a citizen of the Kaiser. He proposed something different. See, Marx looked at how economics had progressed through history and how it was likely to progress. And he saw that industrialization was going to create a future time of abundance, which we seem to be realizing. And, how do we get there? He was wondering how this march of history would continue on into the future. And he realized that it was the workers having control of things that would make the difference. He was responding to this world, a world of imperial decision making, not so much a world of free market capitalism. But the way we talk about the two, You have Adam Smith, Karl Marx, capitalism, socialism. Well, that's not the way it is. You can easily see in Adam Smith's writing that the welfare of people, their health, their safety, their ability to pursue their dreams is extremely important. Sounds kind of Marxist. And you can see in Marx's writings that he is not talking about just jumping forward into a time of utopia. No, he saw that as a progression. Go step by step, sort of like the wheel of Dharma in Buddhism, that you can't take shortcuts. Now, people who read his work said, great, there's a future time coming, let's get there right away, let's jump right to enlightenment. And Marx kept saying, no, 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 to the point where at the end of his life he said, the last thing in this world I would want to be called is a Marxist. Now, Marx didn't live to see Bolshevism, or Leninism as we might call it, but he would have been horrified, I guarantee you. For one thing, Marx was a bit of an anarchist. He didn't believe that governments were the answer. Again, governments to him were these imperial dynasties. No, what he was looking at was a time when the people made all the decisions, when there was absolute freedom. Now, I was emphasizing how long ago Marx wrote, not just because of this imperial issue, but Marx really didn't consider two very important things. One is the importance of skill in developing this, techne, the technology, as I referred to in a previous video. He looked at workers in bulk, and that's a serious problem. The specialization that required a great deal of integration just never entered his mind. He also de-emphasized market forces, largely because he lived in a world that wasn't as well defined by market forces. It was defined by imperial force. Those are two very important shortcomings in terms of looking at Marx. Neither Adam Smith nor Karl Marx really said anything about money as we understand it. And if you look at how socialism, Marxism, developed over the years, we see the same problem we have in capitalism. You can say socialism and mean two very separate things. Okay? So, what is socialism? Well, if it's just taking care of workers and so on, Germany is a great socialist paradise. They have works councils that have a lot to say about how a factory is run. There is a social safety net for people. There is free public education for those who qualify for it. Healthcare is available in a system that takes care of things. I mean, is Germany a socialist paradise? Actually, it kind of is. But it's a great capitalist nation. It's one of the great technological leaders. What do these words really mean? They don't mean anything. And as we look forward into the future, they mean even less. And when we talk about money and what money is, away from this imperial diktat and into something more modern, the distinctions between the two become even less important. The words just don't describe anything meaningful anymore. And that's what it comes down to. We really need to drop the isms. For example, modern day socialism, away from the ancient history, often talks about something called MMT, or modern monetary theory. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about modern monetary theory. First of all, it was initially proposed by a man named Warren Mosler. You may not know about him, it was his PhD thesis. He wasn't describing a great future utopia as to how money would be managed. He was describing how things were actually done. And by the way, he was horrified by it. He would describe that as the root of the problem today. What he saw as a bond trader, working for, I think, Goldman, was that when the United States issued a bunch of debt, they would basically, the idea is that you sell off a bunch of bonds, that raises money, and then you have the money that the government can spend after it's created the debt. What he saw was that they would put out the bond sale, but they would just start spending the money before the bonds were even sold. And some days you had a bad bond sale, you didn't sell all of them the first day, they're like, we'll get it, whatever. But they had already accredited the money. To him, he saw that money was being created spontaneously. And it horrified him, because there was no control over the process. There was no oversight. There was no limits to what they could do. Now, this has been picked up by a lot of people who generally call themselves socialists or are called socialists to say, hey, money is created spontaneously. We don't need to worry about all this debt thing. And it is a great way, if you think about it, to get around that problem that all money is debt, right? All money becomes what? Growth, technology. The problem is, and this is what Mosler was talking about in his PhD thesis, is that money becomes something political. I mean, if government can just print money willy-nilly, what's to stop them from printing it? You say, well, there could be mathematical formulas, there could be a committee, there could be whatever, but it is a political decision no matter what. That should horrify you, because you might have a good politics one day and you might have terrible venal leadership the next day, people who just want to buy votes by issuing checks. I didn't accuse anybody of anything, did I? I mean, this is what imperial governments did back when they created wars, is very often they would print money like this, and sometimes this kind of money failed. Sometimes it brought down empires. In fact, the German Empire doesn't exist anymore, does it? But these kind of banknotes or Reichsmarks were often issued that sort of way, willy-nilly, based on political needs, based on what the Kaiser wanted to do. You say, oh, but you know, a modern democratic government is different. Oh, is it really? So just turning the money over to making a political decision is not necessarily an answer. It's certainly something that needs to be thought of long and hard. But my point remains that capitalism and socialism are not as different and diametrically opposed as people say. And in fact, each of those words has so many different meanings that people jump back and forth between. Capitalism, does it mean free market? Or does it mean protectionism, like mercantile capitalism? Socialism, does it mean Leninism with state control? Or does it mean anarchism? Does it mean a more modern definition? Or is it really that utopian paradise that Marx envisioned looking way forward into the future? Adam Smith and Karl Marx both can guide us if you understand them in their context. But then you have to strip away hundreds of years of history and try to focus on what they were actually saying. The isms that grew up around their works and the works of many other economists, I've already mentioned Keynes, Friedman, and Fisher previously, the works of all of these economists can easily be taken out of context and be given meanings that, well, they're subject to political pressures too. We see what happens to what processes and desires they were outlining. Imagine if the political process had full control over money independently. You may not like it being in the hands of banks. You may not like it being about debt. That is a problem, especially if the time value of money is inherently broken by deflationary pressure. But in terms of what comes next, you have to free your mind from all of the dreck that comes from whatever you think capitalism is, whatever you think socialism is, good, bad, fighting each other, boom. No. We are looking at a very different time. If we have indeed outstripped the ability to create money as we have known it for centuries, then we need to start from ground zero. Writers like Smith and Marx do have a lot to teach us, but we have to free them from all of the dreck that has been put on top of them over the years. And the great isms of the world are just little boxes that confine our thinking. They're all based on what came before. We need to start talking about what comes next. Because if this situation hasn't convinced everybody that the world is changing rapidly and will continue to change rapidly, I don't know what will. We need to focus on where we are going, not where we have been. Now, where we have been can be a good approximation, give us some idea of the direction. That's what Karl Marx was talking about, using history as a guide to see where things must go. And we are reaching a time of great abundance. But Marx himself didn't really see all of the nitty gritty details that went into it. And Adam Smith definitely gave us great guidance about the power of markets, that invisible hand that's not God, the invisible hand of, well, Vox Popularum est Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God, right? Yeah, okay. Um, Everybody independently working together, going a certain direction. Take away all of the isms, take away the stifling ideology, and see things for what they are. It's absolutely critical. That's what those two guys did. That's what made them great economists and writers. And we all need to appreciate them for what they are, and we need to look forward to the future. We need to drop the isms. Thank you.